First, I want to tell you a story. I have a daunting task before me, which is to explain everything you need to know about internet and energy use in 20 minutes. So the story I want to tell you starts in 1999. There was an article in Forbes magazine. It was titled, Dig More Coal, the PCs are coming. And that article claimed that the internet used 8% of all US electricity. The total computing electricity use was 13%, including the internet. And that total was going to grow to half of all US electricity by 2010. Around that same time, we saw the first inklings of the California electricity crisis. And during that period, many people, including some who should have known better, claimed that that crisis was caused primarily or even entirely by growth in the electricity used by computers. Now, all of those claims were wrong. The internet electricity use estimate was more than a factor of 8 too high. The total power use for computers was more than a factor of 4 too high. And the California electricity crisis was almost entirely the result of market manipulation by Enron and other market players. Now, at that time, in the early 2000s, I was a staff scientist at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and I was studying these issues, and I got a call from General Electric. They make power plants. They wanted to know, is electricity demand growth going to be much higher given the use of the internet and computing technologies? I had to disappoint them. But the important lesson I took from that conversation was that getting the numbers right on this topic really, really matters. And that's why I'm so excited and proud to see all these great minds in the room today talking about this issue. So let's start by defining what we mean by the internet. So this is a picture from some great work for Sweden by Jens Malmud and his colleagues, and it shows in schematic form the different parts of the network. You see familiar names, data centers, the core network through which all the data flow, the access networks. Then there's a set of technologies over here which we call the end user equipment. And this is where the complexity arises. We can all agree, I think, that the data centers, the core network, and the access networks are part of the internet. But what about your wireless modem? Well, it's probably part of the internet too. Cable modem also. But what about your PC? Your PC does many things. Some of them connected to the internet, some of them not. So if you're playing a game, is that internet? Well, sometimes, but mostly not. If you're on email, if you're on web browser, that's internet related. But if you're not using Google Docs, you're doing a spreadsheet or word processing, that's not the internet either. So that's not even the worst of it. Because an internet-enabled refrigerator, an internet-enabled dishwasher or washing machine, is that part of the internet? Well, some part of that energy you can legitimately say is part of that. But the problem is that a lot of that energy is not internet-related. And what you had around 2000 was people taking devices like that, assuming there was going to be a lot more internet connectivity and saying all that electricity used for those devices is the internet. And so we have to be really careful in defining what we're talking about. Anytime we say something is internet-related, let's be clear about what that energy use is and does. By all means, let's measure the electricity use of these end-user devices, but let's not claim that all of it is necessarily internet-related. So when we think of the internet, we think of data flows. And this is data from Hilbert et al. In Science from a couple years ago. It shows over the last 20 years about a 100-fold increase in total data flows over our networks. It also shows a massive shift from voice communications being the dominant form of data flow to the fixed internet being the dominant form. So big change over that period. Now, we know that the internet is data, but the internet is also physical. We need devices to make the internet run. We need devices to access the internet. So these are the characteristics of these devices affect the energy use of the whole system, and that's something we need to be careful in tracking. This is more data from Sweden. This is the best data that I've found on a whole system analysis. And what it shows is the electricity use in gigawatt hours per year for different components of the network. The biggest part of the electricity use is user equipment. The second biggest part is the data centers, and the third biggest part is the access networks. So these are the key things I'm going to talk about today, the big three. Let's talk about end-user equipment. I like to break this up into 4 categories. We have computing, communications, display, and then ultra-low power computing and sensors. Now, these are small now. In general, they're ultra-low power, so they don't use a lot of power per unit, but they're growing rapidly, and the possibilities for those are great. But right now, the most important items are the top 3, computing, communications, and display. What drives the electricity use of these devices is in part their individual power levels, but also the numbers of units. And so here I've plotted data from IDC, from Vernon Turner, and this is installed base, the first graph, installed base of desktops and laptop computers. And what it shows in 2012 is about 1.6 billion connected devices. So we've had substantial growth. You see desktops actually growing rapidly and then leveling off as laptops start to eat into their market share. Laptops are still growing there. So 1.6 billion connected devices there. I've also plotted servers. This is a different scale. It's installed base too, but it's about 30 million servers now installed. You have to remember, though, the servers represent lots of other equipment, the networking, the storage, all the cooling fans, pumps. So this is kind of a proxy for total electricity use of data centers. You see rapid growth until the financial crisis, and then a leveling off of installed base of servers after that. In 2011, we identified a long-term trend in the energy efficiency of computing. We showed that the efficiency of computing has doubled roughly every year and a half for the last 60-plus years, longer than Moore's Law. And this trend has enabled the creation of new devices. So first, tablets. This is more data from IDC. It shows the annual shipments of desktops and laptops. And it shows that in 2012, the tablets actually matched the desktop shipments. And by 2013, IDC expects them to exceed both desktops and laptops in terms of annual shipments. So very rapid growth in this ultra-low power technology. We've also seen massive growth in mobile telecommunications. This graph shows subscriptions for telecom worldwide from Hilbert and Lopez in 2012. And we've got, in 2010, about 6 billion subscriptions. Most of that is mobile. The fixed line phones kind of leveling out over that period. And the growth in the last 10 years has been mostly the 2.5G, 3G mobile. So phones, cellular phones, use 1 or 2 kilowatt hours a year. Tablets, 10 or 12 kilowatt hours per year. Your laptop PC, maybe 70. Your desktop PC, if it's a big one, maybe 200. So big shifts here, orders of magnitude, in terms of the electricity used per device. As we shift more towards mobile devices, the importance of the embedded emissions becomes greater and greater. So each device uses less, a lot less, as I described, but there are many more of them. So you have to think about both the energy use per device as well as the number of devices. And then the percentage contribution of manufacturing to the total life cycle emissions for these devices is much greater for the ultra-low power and the low power devices. So I show here smartphone, laptop computer, a small server, and you see a big shift as you move up the graph towards the ultra-low power devices. Absolute emissions is lower per unit, but of course there are many more of those. Let's look at data centers. This is work I did in 2011 for the New York Times, and it shows first about a doubling of total electricity use in data centers worldwide from 2000 to 2005. It also shows somewhat slowing growth by 2010. I calculate an upper and lower bound between 1.1 and 1.5% of data center electricity use in 2010. 1.1 and 1.5% of total electricity use is data centers in 2010. It's also important to note that a huge fraction of the electricity here is the cooling and power distribution to support the data centers and the servers. So it's not just the IT equipment. This other equipment matters a lot as well. So the lessons from the last 10 years of researching data centers, number one, there are huge inefficiencies in what I call in-house data centers. These are data centers in companies for which the primary business is not computing. Generally, the cloud providers do much, much better in sorting out these issues. Just adopting best practices will save at least 50%. So we know how to do this, but the impediments to efficiency are institutional. They're not technical. In general, the IT efficiency is the most important thing to focus on. It's most cost-effective. It's most rapid in delivering savings, followed by improving the infrastructure efficiency and sourcing of low-carbon electricity. Now, the cloud providers have pretty much solved the infrastructure efficiency problem. Now the focus is on the computing equipment and sourcing low-carbon electricity. So let's turn to access networks. This is more data from Hilbert and Lopez in 2012. This shows installed bandwidth in 2010 in the world. And the top three categories here are the landline technologies, DSL, cable modem, fiber, followed by that 2.5G mobile data, which we saw, which is a huge proportion of the total subscriptions worldwide. So the bandwidth is higher for the landline technologies. This is data from the Swedish case to give you an example of how the energy use might compare, ranked. And so you see 2G and 3G are the wireless technologies. They're the biggest in terms of electricity use per year. And then the plain old telephone system with voice over IP is number 2. And the broadband technologies are below. So these two graphs together tell you that in terms of kilowatt hours per gigabyte, the electricity intensity of transferring data, the landline technologies are much more efficient than the mobile technologies. So I'm going to turn now to what I think is one of the most important parts of this whole topic, which is the system effects of information technology. And you'll hear a lot more about this in the rapid fire talks after this. I'm going to give 3 examples. I'm going to talk about dematerialization. I'm going to talk about what I call big system optimization. And I'm going to talk about enabling structural change, all of which IT allows us to do in ways that we never could do before. So this is an example that Scott Matthews will talk about later, but this is dematerialization. We examined the downloading of music versus buying it on a CD. And what we found, even though we used an absolute upper limit to the electricity intensity of the internet, was that in the best case for CDs versus the worst case for digital downloads, it was still a 40% savings. Best case for CDs versus the best case for digital downloads, 80% savings. So big savings possible there by moving bits instead of moving atoms. In terms of big system optimization, a small amount of electricity use, small amount of data flow can have huge effects on how we use larger systems. So Streetline Networks puts in these wireless sensor nodes into parking spaces. Here's an example here. They're battery powered. The batteries last a few years. And each of them is ultra low power. They connect via a mesh network. What it allows you to do, though, is look on your cell phone to find parking. So you don't have to drive around to find parking. And anyone who's done that in San Francisco recently knows it's a big problem. A huge amount of driving in cities and congestion and other problems comes from that. And so the amount of electricity to do this for the entire city of LA, 40,000 parking spots, is 15 watts. Tiny amount of electricity, tiny amounts of data flow, but a huge potential effect on this much larger system of cars and trucks driving around. So there are lots more examples like that one. Then I want to focus on what I call structural change. This is something that's been a big topic in the business literature related to information technology. IT enables what they call business process redesign. The archetypal example is Walmart. They gave their suppliers access to the point of sale and inventory data as well as the internal forecasts. And that allowed the suppliers to coordinate more effectively with Walmart. Walmart also pioneered the use of RFID. And the result of all this was much better coordination. So much lower inventory, much lower costs of distributing things, and efficiency improvements across the board, not just energy, not just emissions, but also labor savings and so on. So huge potential effects here, and we're just at the beginning of these kind of redesign effects. So I'm going to highlight a few key research issues. Some of them I think will come out in the later talks. There will be additional ones as well. The critical thing, in my view, is that we need much better data. We have anecdotal data. We have regional data in some cases. Most of the recent efforts have been very small in scope. But what we need is a single research group, very well funded, to spend serious time pulling together all these threads and pulling together not just the telecom, not just the computing part, the data centers, and everything else. So this is a big need. It's going to take a lot of effort and resources. We also need the devices and the systems to do much better automated reporting. So here's the shocking thing. IT is supposed to be really great at collecting data and aggregating it, but in a lot of data centers, they still can't even tell you how many servers they have. They can't, literally they can't, I'm not kidding, but literally they can't poll their servers and get the data. All of those servers have the ability to collect the data, but most data centers don't use that information. It's changing, but it's slow. So we need that automated reporting so that we can start aggregating the data and really understanding better what's going on. So there's also an issue related to average versus marginal energy use. So when you look at a piece of networking equipment, the power use of that equipment doesn't change much if it's at 0 load or 100% load. Allocating that energy use is a difficult thing to do because you can either say, you can allocate the fixed amount to the total data flow, or you can just say, well, there's only this small marginal effect, and that's what we're going to talk about for our electricity intensity. Different studies use different conventions, and the problem is people are not aware that there are these two conventions. They don't explain clearly what's going on, so we need to be careful about that. We also need many more case studies of system efficiency. So that, it's very hard to, in the aggregate, get a picture of what's happening to the economy, but by focusing on individual case studies, individual companies, we can start to compile a catalog of interesting effects, things that are measured carefully, and we can start to generalize from those to say something reasonable about what the potential big picture effects are. So let me just summarize. I think that this popular preoccupation with the electricity used by internet-related systems is probably misplaced. The direct electricity use is, we think, around maybe a little less than 10% of total electricity use. No one knows for sure, but it's not well characterized. And those boundary issues that I talked about in the beginning about the end-user devices turn out to be really difficult. It's not trivial to figure out what's internet-related and what isn't. And so we have to be careful when the language that we use around this matters a lot. We need to be very careful when we talk about what's internet-related and what isn't, that we're not lumping things in that are not internet-related. Because what happened last time was that people used careless boundaries to argue that the internet was exploding, and it was going to be this huge drain on the power system. And we just need to make sure that we don't fall into that trap when our language doesn't contribute to it. So I argue that these system effects are potentially much more important than the direct electricity use. So it's the other 90% of the electricity use plus all the fuels that we can do something about using IT by collecting more data and using it effectively. And that gives us the potential to even more than offset the direct electricity use of the devices. And finally, we need to spend a whole lot more time and resources collecting consistent, careful data on this topic, because we're right now in this place where we have a lot of anecdotal data, but we're really not able to say with accuracy and certainty even what the total electricity use for those core networks are for the world. We just don't know the answer. So we need a lot more data. We need the people in this room to step up and figure out how to collect it in a more effective way. And with that, thanks to everyone.